Debbi Gibbs is the daughter of Dame Jenny and Alan Gibbs, grew up in Titirangi in Auckland and now chairs the infamous Atlas Network, or at least infamous if you read New Zealand or Australia media. We're on the sidelines of Atlas Network's European Liberty Forum. I'm over here for a World Taxpayers event and for Atlas Network's CEO Forum, and I thought, what a great opportunity to speak to, ironically, the New Zealander that chairs this infamous international group of independent think tanks promoting freedom, human dignity, and championing the removal of barriers to human flourishment around the world. Debbi Gibbs, welcome to Taxpayer Talk.
Hi Jordan, thanks for having me.
So, first and foremost, how does a girl growing up in Titirangi, although I appreciate your mum and dad are very much involved, were very much involved in public affairs, go from Auckland Architecture School to New York and now heading arguably one of the world's most effective think tanks?
Well, it's been a circuitous journey, to say the least. I was managing bands simultaneously with doing my architecture degree and running the student radio station in Auckland. And the main band I used to manage, Straight Jacket Fits, were assigned to a New York-based record company, Arista Records, and we had a publishing company and an agent in New York, and I spent a lot of time there. So when the band broke up and I was looking for another way to occupy myself, I decided to move to New York.
The New York or the Hollywood or creative scene or music scene in general is not the usual pipeline for conservative or libertarian think tankers or activists. What lit the flame for you to become such a leader in the freedom movement around the world?
Well, firstly, I am not a conservative. I have very, very few, if any, conservative views.
But hang on, that's the perception, and the Mihingarangi Forbes of the world paint Atlas as an American conservative, anti-abortion, dark money group trying to influence local politics. What do you mean Atlas Network isn't conservative?
They're not. We're classical liberals, and there may be conservatives within the network. There are almost 500 think tanks within the network, and within all of those think tanks, there are undoubtedly people that hold conservative views. But it's certainly not the focus. For those people that do have social conservative views, the way they fit into the classical liberal tent is that they believe those views are personal. They don't want them, they don't expect government to regulate their personal perspectives. So,
what do you mean by classical liberal?
To me, it's about, I actually came to classical liberalism not through the usual economic route. I came through feminism and John Stuart Mill and, Mum, when I was growing up, Mum was always the president of Planned Parenthood and working for to legalise abortion in New Zealand. And then my first real policy engagement in the US was through the end-of-life choice, which had been another thing that Mum and I had both been very supportive of in New Zealand. And when I became involved with the end-of-life choice movement in the US, I've been on the board of the National End-of-Life Choice Organisation for this entire century, since 1999. So that's been a long-term commitment. And for me, it's about individual freedom. And I was a bit slow to understand the significance of of economic freedom and business liberalisation. But where I instinctively was drawn to the idea of increasing freedom is that I'd always thought of a lot of government regulation is incredibly paternalistic, and how could these people think they know better? I believe in people. People should have individual choices and rights, and I also believe in pluralism and disagreement, and for me, classical liberalism that's what it's about.
So that sparked the interest in public policy. What about then Atlas Network? How were you introduced to the organisation and become obviously a member of the board and now chair?
So initially I was introduced to Atlas Network through a friend of the family, Linda Whetstone, who was my predecessor as
one of the most amazing people I've ever met.
Yeah, and she became a real mentor for me. She just had this unbelievable network of people around the world. When we were travelling, Dad used to always say, "Ring that fantastic lady Linda and ask her if she knows anybody interesting in Turkey or Kenya," or, you know, when she died a few years ago, there was this outpouring of love from around the world. I mean, all across Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, all these people that used to call her Mama Linda. You know, she was such an enormous mentor and such a sort of pragmatic, you know,
Absolutely.
figure it out, go get 'em woman. She was really very inspiring. And she was the one that first invited me to Atlas Network's flagship international forum in New York. And once I started meeting the people and the projects, and Did
any stand out? What were what lit the flame?
The first one I was really interested in, the first dinner I went to, I was sitting next to Parth Shah, who is currently on the board of Atlas Network, and was there being recognised for a project to license street vendors in India. They were illegal and constantly being harassed. You know, their carts would be overturned, their produce would be stolen. The police, because they were illegal, the police would shake them down for money or product all the time. And that was really when I realised that economic liberty is every bit as important as personal liberty. You're talking about people's livelihoods, and I'd always thought of it as when you talk about ease of doing business, I had associated that with protecting big corporations, where my perspective shifted when I saw this project that was about, you know, enabling ordinary everyday people to make their way in the world. And we have lots of projects around the world that I love that are about that sort of doing business, you know. And one of our key partners in Africa at the moment, a real rock star in Burundi, his first came to my attention because he'd been working on the issue for women who trade across, you know, Burundi is a landlocked country, and these women trade across all these borders, and they needed dozens of permits to do that. And every single application for a permit was, you know, the more bureaucracy, the more corruption, and every application was an opportunity for a shakedown, or for them to lose some of their products, or for often, you know, sexual molestation and even rape. And he's managed to reduce those dozens of requirements for cross-border trading down to one document that lasts 2 years. And the impact on these women's lives is just extraordinary. You know, it's just changed their capacity to do what they want to do and care for their families.
You know, our opponents, or in New Zealand, but more generally, Atlas Network's opponents around the world like to paint Atlas as acting for, you know, big American corporate interests, and it's all about, you know, freedom to do business is freedom for American conglomerates to get in there. Well, let's cover the elephant in the room then. Who funds Atlas Network?
It's largely individuals and foundations. We have, I mean, you can look on the website, there's the Smith Family Foundation, the John Templeton Foundation, and a whole lot of individuals who believe in freedom and people, and you know, that amount of, we don't take any government funding, and none of our partners do either, and we have infinitesimal corporate funding. I don't
recall ever meeting a corporate at your New York event. It's always individuals.
Exactly.
I know you and I consider it bananas, but let's get into it. 2 days before Christmas, Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand have republished it, a piece called Trick or Treaty that has the narrative that Atlas Network was heavily involved in the No campaign for Australia's Voice referendum, that there were connections into Atlas Network, and that through my organisation and the other partners of Atlas Network in New Zealand, you are coming for Indigenous rights in New Zealand off the back of the ACT Party's proposed referendum on treaty principles. Look, this is really just a front for oil and gas interests that don't like Indigenous rights because they want to be able to extract resources.
Yeah, it's absurd. I
worked very hard to keep with a straight face here, but I mean, and seriously, are you funded by oil and gas?
So in the entire time I've been on the board, we haven't had a single donation from any oil or gas companies.
Well, why didn't you say that to Mihingarangi Forbes?
She didn't ask.
So the whole thesis of that, what was it, a half an hour, 40-minute long documentary on Atlas Network, do you think that they know it's chaired by a New Zealander? Or do you think they just didn't care and didn't want to seek the other side?
I have no idea. They did not reach out to us at all. I can't speak for them. I don't know what they're thinking. But the idea that we carry water for any corporate interests, let alone oil and gas, it's just absurd. And if you look at you've seen the passion amongst our partners in Europe.
And in the Baltics and even the Middle East that's represented here.
Yeah. These people are not doing this for money.
Tell me about it. Although, I mean, on the other hand, I mean, we are extremely lucky to fight for what we believe in. I mean, we get, and I always feel somewhat guilty coming to Atlas Network events where you meet so many people whose livelihoods, but in many cases even lives, are under threat because they get up in the morning and are motivated
So that's the thing about, when they call us a secretive cabal, and they say they point to the fact that we took our partner directory off the website as proof of our secretiveness. I mean, most of our partners, we celebrate them and applaud them all over our website. You can see
couldn't be more open. I mean, in fact, I love this.
The main reason we actually took our or at least one of the main reasons we took our directory down is because we had our partners being hunted by the Taliban once they retook power in Afghanistan. We had, all of our partners have fled Russia. We've had to, help smuggle our partners out of Iran. There are people really working in dangerous places all across Africa whose lives are under threat. We've had, partners every year at the Liberty Forum. We honour our partners who have died. It is really humbling. And, the idea that we are sitting here focusing on our attention on the extractive industries is just absurd. They're just not even on our radar. We're trying to, impact people's real lives, and we have people risking their lives to do that all over the world.
Yeah, I just find it bananas that a lot of the stuff coming out of Australia and New Zealand goes back to a single academic who literally tweets that the first rule about Atlas is don't talk about Atlas, but then grabs my tweets, for which I've always been very open and proud and thankful for the incredible opportunities that Atlas has provided me when I founded the Taxpayers Union at 27 and barely knew what to do, sort of thing. So the other question I have to ask is, obviously we're in Madrid at the moment. The president of Argentina, Milei, has been in Europe this week, and according to Spanish media, is undermining democratically elected socialist governments. Did Atlas have anything to do with this, or is it just a coincidence that we are in Spain while this has happened?
Well, of course it's a coincidence. We announced the time and place of this meeting publicly a year ago, and I doubt Milei has been setting his agenda around this, our meeting. But the other thing is, it's really unfortunate that he spent his time here meeting with, abhorrent authoritarian leaders in Europe. It was, you know, I love a lot of what Malay stands for. But
Have you met him?
No.
No.
But
But hang on, Atlas, I've read online that Atlas were a big part of you got him elected. In the same way as you got Christopher Luxon as government elected and you bet the Voice referendum.
I mean, honestly, it's
Do you get frustrated? Because you've had these questions from media, haven't you?
Yeah. Well, firstly, we have no association with any political party. We don't fund political campaigns at all. If our partners are involved in political campaigns, that's not something that and most of them are not. They're involved in campaigns for policies, but not for political parties. And, so the idea that we had got anybody elected is laughable.
So so this academic and this expert that TVNZ and RNZ go to that publish the picture of the New Zealand beehive and the octopus of Atlas sort of tentacles all through New Zealand government. Are you saying that's not right?
What's one of the really funniest things about that whole claim is that he suggested that we had been responsible for the failure of the Voice campaign in Australia. It was not on Atlas's radar at all because none of our partners were working on it. And we spent $62,000 in Australia and New Zealand last year. And if with that amount of money, we managed to overturn a multi-million-dollar campaign in Australia.
Backed by Qantas and all the corporate institute of directors.
And all the big oil companies backed the Yes campaign. They put in millions of dollars for the Yes campaign. We overcame that and got the New Zealand government elected with $62,000. It's just unbelievable.
That is good bang for buck. That's good. But the connection is Advance Australia, this group that managed the no vote. Are they a partner or otherwise connected to Atlas?
We don't know them at all. They've never been a partner, and we had never heard of them until we were accused of funding them. I can see why
Ms Forbes didn't approach you, because this would have destroyed her whole the whole thesis.
Exactly.
So the connection that they claim is that one of the spokespeople for the no vote sits on the board of a partner within Atlas Network. I think it's Centre for Independent Studies, who, in fact, I think Bill English is on their board as well, and I know Ruth Richardson used to be. So a board member was involved in the campaign.
But apparently CIS had a board member involved on both sides of the campaign, which is why they didn't take
Hang on, so Atlas was funding both sides?
CIS did not get involved in the campaign because they had a plurality of views about the Voice. So they didn't take a position. And they had people who were, and I mean, that's what classical liberalism is all about, a plurality of views. It's about, I'm always happy to discuss ideas and the best policies for improving things. It's the name calling and the disparaging and the impugning people's motives that really drives me nuts. And
Debbi, you're given too much benefit of the doubt. I look at that, it's lying. The stuff they accuse my organisation of being anti-climate change. I've emailed that academic and said, stop lying. Look at, we support the emissions trading scheme to be pan-sector. In fact, it's more radical than the Greens. We support the emissions trading system. We say it should apply to agriculture. Just ignores it.
Yeah.
That isn't name calling. That is something else.
It is lies, and we have a lot of people that work on environmental issues within the movement, and we have some partners who are exclusively about environmental issues. I mean, one of our smart bets for last year was
explain what smart bets is.
So this is
I'm self-serving here. We will one last year too.
We select a group of high-performing partners who we believe will be of interest to our donors. We like our donors to be invested not just in Atlas Network, but in the partners, and every year we present a short list of high-performing donors to the network in the hope that they will gain additional funding and additional support from other people in the network. And last year, one of our smart bets, who was one of the finalists in smart bets, was the American Conservation Coalition, and I happened to be on their advisory board as well. And they're a group they were based out of universities in America, young people focused on environmental issues, but trying to address environmental issues with, a broad classical liberal set of policy proposals. And so, we're not climate deniers.
I just wanted to quote a piece that has been quoted in New Zealand media. One of the things that's consistent across all of these Atlas network think tanks is that they will oppose anything that gets in the way of the fossil fuel industry, whether it's climate policy, Indigenous land rights. What is Atlas's policy position on climate change?
We don't have a policy on climate change. Atlas Network doesn't present policies to our.
But you must instruct partners though around campaigns and.
You think that's the other thing that's absurd. The idea that we direct our almost 500 partners around the world and tell them what they should be.
Stop through waters was a great idea.
So how would we know, for example, that the biggest issue for women entrepreneurs in Burundi was the dozens of regulations that they have to meet in order to trade across borders? How could we possibly know that? That's what we call the outsider's dilemma. So we don't establish policy. Our local partners are completely independent, and they come to us and say, we see this huge issue, and we have a way of addressing it that we think will make people's lives better. And we say, we look at their proposals and we fund what we can, but we don't have overarching policies or directives. We're not a top-down organisation. We're a bottom-up.
It's not even funding. From my perspective, we've obviously won some awards, probably the most significant.
I want to interrupt you because you pushed one of my buttons when you did this. Indigenous property, mentioned that quote that we have a policy against Indigenous property rights. That drives me absolutely bananas because the first project I really fell in love with that made me want to actually get actively involved in Atlas was a property rights issue in South Africa where the Temba Nolachunga, who was we honoured last year for his achievements, he had this project called Kaya Lam in South Africa because, under the apartheid regime, black Africans weren't allowed to own property. And even after the end of the regime, they were still, the bureaucracy around gaining title was almost impossible to navigate. So he had a team of people go in and help individual families who had lived in a shack often for generations, but they didn't own it. And he helped them gain title to their land. And the impact that it had on these people and their homes. They'd live in a shack that they did very little with, and as soon as they owned it, they transformed it, and they had something to pass on to their children. They had something that enabled them to get a loan and start a business. So he has enabled the titling of 10,000 houses in the townships of South Africa, and that's not just 10,000 individuals, that's 10,000 families that have been empowered to improve their lives and their homes through their work. And that, for me, that was such an amazing, transformative project. I fell in love with it. But there is so much else that we do with Indigenous property rights. In India, when they were a colony, the king had claimed all the land, and a lot of it was then turned into national parks. But there were Indigenous Indian groups that had been living and farming in those national parks since long before that time, and helping them gain title to their land was another project part that one of our partners undertook that involved changing the law, and the law then required that they prove that they had been farming this land before the law was introduced, which for these Indian villages was impossible. And our partners managed to get old Google Earth photos and overlay that with their verbal descriptions of the land that their family had been farming, and prove to the government that they had been working and living on this land historically and gain title for them, which, we have so many projects around the world that are around helping Indigenous people gain property rights. The idea that we would undermine Indigenous property rights for the sake of extractive industries is just,
crazy.
It's not
It's
offensive.
The only reference to Māoridom that I've ever experienced in relation to Atlas Network was your Māori speech and greeting to the gala dinner in New York, 2 years ago. It's literally the only reference I've come across. So this is my second to last question. Why is this stuff coming from Australia and New Zealand, from your home patch? Do you find it?
I have no idea. It's really bizarre. I think it's just this one professor in Sydney who has a bee in his bonnet, although it's not just coming out of Australia and New Zealand. We've also had really weird accusations of political influence coming out of Mexico, where again, we have no political involvement anywhere in the world. We're not tied to. We want to be non-partisan, specifically because we want to propose policies that work, and if they are that work for people. And
so it's promotion of the values, the policies, rather than the politicians.
Of course, and every political party has valid proposals that are, for example, our latest grant into New Zealand is to the Free Speech Union for their project. They're working to prevent there's a proposal to ban gang patches, and that is
this is your government's. That's the government you got elected is doing this, and it's to support the ban, is it?
It's an illiberal policy. Telling people what they can and can't wear and how they can express themselves is a free speech issue, and we are free speech absolutists. We think that ideas should be surfaced, they should be discussed. People should be allowed to express themselves, and so we have, put a modest amount of funding into the Free Speech Union's campaign to oppose the gang patch ban.
It will still be a tiny percentage.
And the only political party that I didn't know what political party stood on what side of that debate previously, but just the other day I looked it up, and the only political party that seems to be on our side of that argument is the Greens. And great, but we don't have party affiliations. We don't agree with any party on everything, and so.
Well, I didn't actually know about that grant, so that's wonderful. As a former board member of the Free Speech Union, that's very very kind. My last question, Debbi, is what's next? What's next for you? I see that you were, congratulations by the way, last week elected onto the board of the Reason Foundation, and I know many of our supporters would have seen the Reason's Foundation's videos, very good explainer videos online. But what do you see as the biggest opportunities and threats for generally the freedom movement, for our organisations promoting human rights, wanting to remove barriers to dignity and promote things like free trade to bring people out of poverty?
To me, the biggest threat is the polarisation. It's the rise of authoritarians, on both the left and the right. We have authoritarian governments, governmental overreach, paternalism writ large, on the rise worldwide, which is really worrying. And then we have this incredible polarisation where people don't talk to each other anymore. They just vilify each other, and, open discussion and debate is how you refine your own thinking, and everybody seems to have put themselves in camps that are incredibly adversarial, and I really worry about how you move forward if people aren't talking to each other, if they're just vilifying each other. I don't know how you get past that and move forward. It is problematic, and I just think all we can do is insist on engaging with people and engaging with issues and encouraging pluralism and conversation, getting back to debating issues, and those are the sorts of things that will surface the best solutions, not sitting in your corner and throwing rocks, and certainly not
You mean to the personalisation and the questioning of people's motives, or saying, well, you would say that, wouldn't you, because you're funded by?
Exactly.
Debbi Gibbs, a Kiwi in charge of this organisation with all this power around the world. Congratulations, and thanks for joining Taxpayer Talk.
Thanks, Jordan.